I stepped into the cafe, my heart light and buzzing with anticipation. Today was my birthday, and for once I wanted to feel seen, celebrated, and cherished. The smell of fresh coffee and baked pastries usually made me feel warm inside. But something about the arrangement of tables and the way people glanced at each other made my chest tighten. My friends were chatting happily near the corner table, but my family, my mom, dad, and brother, were already seated, and I noticed the way Mom's eyes flicked to my brother as I approached. She leaned in, her lips barely moving, whispering something I couldn't quite catch. My brother's face twisted slightly, and I instantly felt a chill of dread. My excitement dimmed as I tried to smile, my pulse racing with a confusing mixture of hope and fear. Why did it feel like I was walking into a trap I hadn't anticipated? I forced myself to shake it off, telling myself I might be overthinking. But deep down, a familiar ache of exclusion pricked at me. Every subtle glance, every half-smile, every quiet chuckle between them felt like a secret I wasn't meant to hear. My mind replayed every past birthday, every moment of being overlooked or dismissed, and the knot in my stomach tightened. I wanted to ask what was whispered, but my voice felt trapped. My words caught somewhere between courage and vulnerability. Instead, I chose a seat across from them, forcing myself to engage in small talk with a brightness I didn't feel, while a quiet storm of confusion and hurt raged inside. The warmth I'd carried from the cafe's aroma faded as I realized that this day, the day I was supposed to feel celebrated, already carried the weight of disappointment and subtle betrayal. As I sipped my latte, I couldn't shake the memory of past birthdays, each one layered with the same invisible hierarchy my family seemed to enforce. I remembered turning 15, proudly showing my science fair project, only to hear my mom gush over my brother's soccer trophy, as if my effort had never existed. At 17, I had baked a cake for the whole family, and while my brother received praise for a simple store-bought dessert, my hours of careful measuring and decorating were barely acknowledged. Every event blurred together. Graduations where my achievements were downplayed, holiday dinners where my suggestions were ignored, and countless quiet moments where my ideas were laughed off. The pattern was impossible to deny, yet for years I had convinced myself it was normal, that maybe I was just too sensitive. Sitting here now, I felt the sting more acutely. I could see the way favoritism had always shaped the dynamics, the subtle hierarchy of approval that elevated my brother and diminished me. The whispers, the approving glances for him, the thinly veiled sighs whenever I tried to contribute. All of it painted a history of neglect and emotional imbalance. The memories were sharper today, amplified by the anticipation of celebration that now felt hollow. Each recollection twisted inside me, mixing anger, hurt, and disbelief. And I realized just how long I had carried these invisible scars. Empathy surged within me for that younger version of myself, the one who had always sought approval and deserved recognition, yet had been met with subtle dismissal at every turn. These reflections made the moment in the cafe even heavier, the echoes of the past colliding with the unfolding present, and I felt the weight of years of unspoken favoritism pressing down on my chest. Before I could even settle into the awkward warmth of the cafe, my brother's whispered instructions became painfully clear. He smirked, barely suppressing a grin, and excused himself with exaggerated politeness. Moments later, he returned not as himself, but in an ostentatiously flamboyant outfit, one entirely inappropriate for the casual gathering, a bright, flashy jacket and loud shoes that drew every eye. My friends stifled laughs, glancing at me with a mixture of confusion and sympathy, while my extended family shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. My mom's eyes glinted with suppressed amusement, and I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, an overwhelming sense of humiliation washing over me. I tried to laugh it off, to mask the sharp sting of betrayal, but each whisper, each chuckle, and every lingering glance made my chest tighten. The cafe that had once felt warm now seemed suffocating, every friendly smile morphing into judgment. Shock immobilized me at first, then confusion. How could they do this, of all days, in front of people I cared about? Anger bubbled beneath the surface, restrained yet insistent, twisting in tandem with a sense of disbelief. My mind raced, dissecting every subtle glance and whispered instruction, piecing together the deliberate orchestration of my embarrassment. I realized then that this wasn't accidental. This was calculated. A cruel blend of favoritism and manipulation meant to make me feel small. The combination of public scrutiny and private betrayal left me teetering between shame and simmering fury, and I knew that somehow, this day would mark the beginning of a shift I could no longer ignore. I forced a smile as laughter rippled around the table, but inside, a storm of resentment and hurt churned relentlessly. Every polite nod, every awkward chuckle from my friends, felt like salt on a wound I had carried for years. Why did it always feel like my successes were invisible, my efforts meaningless, while my brother could do the smallest thing and be showered with praise? I wondered if I had done something wrong, if somehow my worth was less in my family's eyes. The contrast between the cheerful faces around me and the quiet cruelty I endured felt unbearable. On the surface, it was a happy gathering, a celebration, but beneath it, I was drowning in neglect and favoritism. My mom's soft whispers, my brother's calculated gestures, the subtle smirks, they all whispered the same message: I was never enough. I replayed every past interaction, every birthday, every holiday, every time I had hoped to be seen, only to be dismissed. Each memory sharpened the sting, making me feel smaller, overlooked, and powerless. And yet, as I sat there, a quiet determination began to form alongside the hurt. I couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, I could reclaim some control over the present. The tension between the public smiles and the private cruelty weighed heavily on me, teaching me a lesson I hadn't wanted to learn. Appearances could deceive, but the truth of my own worth couldn't be erased. After the party ended and the last of the guests trickled out, I found myself alone in my room, the remnants of celebration around me feeling hollow. The laughter, the clinking of coffee cups, even the happy birthday wishes replayed in my mind. But all I could feel was the sting of humiliation. My mom's whispered instruction, my brother's smug compliance. It had been a carefully orchestrated performance, and I was the unwilling star. Anger simmered beneath the surface, coiling tighter with every memory of the afternoon. I pressed my palms to my face, trying to steady my racing thoughts, but my mind refused to rest. Instead, it began to plan, piecing together ways to reclaim control, to assert myself without appearing desperate or reactive. Small scenarios played out, each one giving me a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. The betrayal, though sharp and painful, had ignited a spark, a realization that I didn't have to be the powerless sibling anymore. Quietly, I began imagining subtle reversals, clever moves that could embarrass them in ways they wouldn't see coming. The humiliation I'd endured transformed into a fuel for strategy, and even as I replayed the party in my mind, I felt a strange excitement rising beneath the anger. The audience of my own thoughts began to anticipate a shift, a turning point where the scales would balance, and I would finally assert the strength they had tried to ignore. In the days following the fallout, I retreated into a quiet, determined focus, assessing every corner of my life as if laying the groundwork for a personal takeover. I started with my finances, reviewing accounts, investments, and opportunities I had previously dismissed, searching for leverage I could quietly use without drawing attention. Work became more than just a job. I began networking strategically, reconnecting with colleagues who could vouch for my competence and influence, planting seeds that might bloom at the perfect moment. Social connections, too, were recalibrated. I reached out to friends and mentors whose recognition carried weight in circles my family respected but rarely acknowledged. Each move was subtle, almost invisible, but with every calculated step, I felt a growing sense of empowerment. For the first time, I realized my independence wasn't just financial, it was social, intellectual, and emotional. Small victories built quietly in the background, while the family remained blissfully unaware that I was no longer the passive observer. The humiliation from the cafe party transformed into strategy, and with every check, call, and meeting, I felt my confidence solidify. I wasn't plotting revenge in the obvious sense, but I was constructing a stage where my presence, influence, and success would speak louder than any words. Each quiet preparation sharpened my resolve, and I knew the moment for subtle, yet undeniable power reversal was approaching. After the cafe incident, I realized that avoiding family gatherings only gave them more power over me. I decided to attend the smaller events, the dinners and weekend meetups that seemed insignificant to them. But to me, they were opportunities to quietly assert myself, to plant subtle reminders that I was no longer invisible. I smiled and nodded, keeping my tone polite, but I started choosing my words carefully, dropping hints of accomplishments they had overlooked. A promotion here, a compliment from a colleague there, small victories that would slowly unsettle them. At first, the subtle tension went unnoticed, but I could see it growing in their eyes. That flicker of unease when I mentioned a project I had led, or a recognition I had earned. My friends began noticing the changes too. They whispered encouragement and excitement at how composed and confident I seemed. Inside, I relished the feeling, a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. Each event became a chessboard, each interaction a calculated move, planting seeds of subtle one-upmanship. The anticipation of eventual payback fueled me, sharpening my focus and reminding me that the humiliation at the cafe was only the beginning. With every understated triumph, the scales began to tilt, and I could feel the tension mounting. They didn't know what I had planned, and that ignorance made me feel alive, empowered, and closer to the justice I had quietly imagined for years. It happened unexpectedly, almost by accident, but the impact was devastatingly satisfying. During a casual family brunch, my brother casually mentioned a new business venture he'd been boasting about for months. I listened quietly, nodding, then casually dropped that I had recently closed a deal with one of the top firms in the city, an opportunity he had previously mocked me for pursuing. My mom's eyebrows shot up, and I caught a flicker of surprise in her eyes that she tried desperately to hide. The subtlety of it was perfect. No one could accuse me of gloating, yet the unspoken comparison was undeniable. My brother's smile faltered for the first time in months, replaced by a hint of discomfort, a crack in his carefully maintained superiority. I felt a surge of triumph bubbling up in my chest, warm and intoxicating. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but the effect was unmistakable. I had planted doubt, shaken their perception, and done it with grace. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly seen, not as the overlooked sibling, but as someone capable, intelligent, and powerful. Confidence swelled inside me, replacing the fear and self-doubt that had been my constant companions. I realized that subtle, clever victories could be more potent than explosive confrontations. And in that quiet moment of private triumph, I tasted the first hints of real empowerment, knowing that this was only the beginning of the reversal they never saw coming. I finally decided it was time to face them, but not in public. Not yet. In the quiet of our family home, I asked my mom and brother to sit with me, insisting on honesty and eye contact. The tension was immediate, thick and almost tangible. I spoke first, my voice steady but charged with years of suppressed frustration. I recounted moments of favoritism, the subtle betrayals, the times my efforts had been minimized while my brother's smallest achievements were celebrated. I watched their faces shift, surprise, defensiveness, and for the first time a flicker of unease. Inside, I felt clarity sharpening with every word. I no longer questioned my worth. I could see the hypocrisy, the double standards, and the deliberate emotional games. My anger simmered, but it was accompanied by an empowering calm. I was no longer a victim. I was a witness to truth, and truth was on my side. Each memory I shared, each carefully framed observation, was a step toward reclaiming authority over my own narrative. I could feel the balance shifting subtly, the moral high ground firmly beneath my feet. For the first time in years, I sensed the power of confrontation done with precision, intelligence, and self-respect, and it energized me for what would come next. I knew subtle victories weren't enough. The ultimate reversal had to be public, undeniable, yet delivered with an elegance that disguised any hint of revenge. Over weeks, I carefully cultivated moments where my social and professional presence intersected with my family's circles. Invitations to events, casual mentions of achievements, and shared successes with colleagues created a backdrop of respect and admiration that my family could not ignore. I didn't brag. I simply allowed my accomplishments to speak for themselves. At a community gala, my brother boasted about a minor promotion, while I was quietly introduced as the lead organizer of a high-profile initiative, someone whose influence had shaped the event's success. The shift in attention was immediate. Whispers of admiration rippled around the room, and I felt a surge of satisfaction watching their faces tighten with subtle disbelief. My mother's smile faltered when friends and acquaintances remarked on my accomplishments. Her earlier favoring of my brother, now highlighted as absurd. Each calculated interaction was a chess move, a demonstration of power cloaked in poise, forcing my family to confront the truth of my competence without me uttering a single word of accusation. Suspense hung in the air, the audience within my mind anticipating the moment when all the subtle seeds I had planted would bloom into an unmistakable, satisfying reversal. For the first time, I felt in control not just of my emotions, but of the narrative itself, knowing that the public stage was set for the payoff they would never see coming. The follow-up gathering was unassuming at first, just a casual family dinner, but I had spent weeks orchestrating it in my mind, predicting every glance, every whispered comment, every opportunity to quietly turn the tables. My brother entered the room with his usual confident smirk, convinced that his social standing and my previous embarrassment still gave him the upper hand. My mom, as always, hovered nearby, projecting that thin veil of control she believed she maintained. I arrived with a calm smile, carrying myself differently this time, poised, assured, radiating quiet confidence that immediately drew attention. Conversations flowed, laughter bubbled, but I carefully steered dialogue toward my recent achievements, mentioning collaborations and successes that my brother had previously dismissed or mocked. The subtle shift in focus caused heads to turn, eyes to linger, and smiles to fade from those who had once looked to my brother for validation. I watched, satisfaction growing as his confidence wavered, a barely perceptible hesitation creeping into his gestures. Then came the moment I had planned. A mutual acquaintance casually mentioned how impressed they were with my leadership in a project my brother had claimed was insignificant, right in front of the family. My mother's lips parted, eyes wide, as the reality of my accomplishments sank in. Her earlier favoritism highlighted in stark contrast. My brother opened his mouth to respond, then stopped, caught between pride and the undeniable truth. In that quiet, loaded pause, the embarrassment and guilt I had once felt were transferred to them. I felt no triumph in cruelty, only the intoxicating satisfaction of justice, a reversal that was clever, subtle, and undeniable. The tension broke in murmurs and sideways glances, and I realized with a deep, contented breath that the scales had finally tipped. I had reclaimed my dignity, asserted my worth, and left them confronting their behavior in a way that words alone never could, delivering a climactic payoff both to myself and anyone who had ever felt overlooked or undervalued. As the evening wound down, I noticed subtle shifts in the way my family looked at me. Hesitation replaced smugness, respect mingled with surprise. My mom's earlier dismissiveness softened, and even my brother's usual confidence carried a quiet acknowledgement of my accomplishments. The contrast between this moment and years of neglect and favoritism was staggering. For so long, I had internalized their disregard, believing I was somehow less than, unseen, unworthy. But now, in their silent recognition, I finally saw myself clearly. Every overlooked birthday, every whispered slight, every small dismissal had forged resilience, sharpened awareness, and cultivated a quiet strength I had underestimated. I felt a swell of emotional relief, a catharsis that was both healing and empowering. I realized my value was not granted by their approval. It had always been inherent, waiting for me to claim it. Reflecting on the past, I understood the lessons hidden in the pain. That validation begins within, that subtle injustices can be transformed into fuel for growth, and that dignity and self-respect are more powerful than public praise. Sitting there, absorbing the quiet acknowledgement of my worth, I felt a sense of peace, pride, and completion. I had reclaimed my narrative, and in doing so, I had learned that the most satisfying revenge is the one that elevates you, leaving no doubt about the strength, intelligence, and integrity you've always possessed. In the quiet aftermath, as I returned to my own space and let the evening settle behind me, I felt a mixture of triumph and contemplation. Justice had been served, not with loud confrontation or vindictive spectacle, but with subtlety, intelligence, and unwavering self-respect. My family had been forced to confront the truth, and I had reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and my sense of worth. Yet amid the satisfaction, there was a bittersweet undertone. I recognized that change in them would be gradual, and some wounds from years of neglect could never fully vanish. Still, I chose empathy over resentment, understanding that their flaws and favoritism were reflections of their own insecurities and limitations. This perspective didn't diminish my victory. Instead, it added depth to it. I had grown stronger, wiser, and more compassionate, learning to navigate life with both courage and grace. The sting of the past lingered only to remind me how far I had come. As I reflected, I realized the real triumph was not in embarrassing them or proving a point, but in reclaiming my own narrative, feeling empowered, and knowing my worth was undeniable. The satisfaction was complete, not because they finally saw me, but because I had seen myself all along, and that recognition was far more powerful than any applause, envy, or validation they could ever offer. Even as the events settled into memory, I knew my journey wasn't over. The victories I had claimed, the quiet reversals, and the recognition I finally earned were only the beginning of a larger transformation. I found myself thinking about the future, about opportunities I hadn't yet seized, and about relationships I could reshape on my own terms. There was a thrill in knowing that the power to define my life no longer rested in my family's hands. I imagined subtle ways to continue asserting independence, strengthening my voice, and creating spaces where my worth would never again be questioned or diminished. And as I reflected, a thought occurred. For anyone who has ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or undervalued, the path forward is not vengeance, but clarity, strategy, and self-belief. The quiet, steady accumulation of respect, both earned and deserved, can be the most profound form of triumph. In that understanding, I felt a sense of hope, a spark of empowerment that extended beyond my own story. Life was no longer about proving myself to others. It was about honoring my own journey, cultivating strength, and embracing the growth that comes from turning past pain into purposeful action. For anyone listening, the lesson was clear. Your worth cannot be dictated by those who fail to see it, but your choices, courage, and vision can shape the life you were always meant to claim.